Okay, welcome everyone to my continuation of what are my favorite theorems, my very biased collection as usual. I need to start with an apology because this theorem is named after, I think, a Dutch mathematician, and I will completely slaughter the name because my Dutch is literally non-existing. Let me just try it right now, and then hopefully you will forgive me that I will kind of completely mispronounce the name of this, well, sadly already dead Dutch physicist. Let me try. Kasteleyn. Kasteleyn. Anyway, what is Kasteleyn theorem? That's kind of, well, hopefully the name is approximately right. So anyway, so I'm using this. It's actually a nice theorem, but it's really nice in context. And I'm using this as an explanation or as an example of something that happens kind of fairly often in mathematics in relation to difficulty of proofs or statements, kind of some version of complexity theory. So the statement itself, the theorem, is pretty good. It's about graphs, but actually what I would like to sell you, and that's also the thumbnail for this video, the clickbait if you want, what I actually want to sell you is this idea that sometimes things are very difficult, but maybe actually not. Maybe they're just difficult because we insist that we want to know it for everything. So maybe it's actually not difficult, maybe it's easy. And this, well, Kasteleyn's theorem is a very great example of that. So let's just get started, and then we will see, kind of get along the way, we will see what I mean by, or we'll try to explain what I mean by very often it happens that difficult is not really difficult, and whatever. We'll see what that means. But the statement itself is pretty simple. So there is something that is called a perfect matching. So what is a perfect matching? A perfect matching is just in a graph, you just match two vertices via a match. So that's a matching. So, well, you match whatever, like jobs and candidates, and there should be a matching between them and optimally, right? So here, there's not really a perfect matching here. So a matching is just matching one candidate to one job. And a perfect matching is something that perfectly works out, right? So this one here is not perfect. It doesn't really work out. So there's a job left over. That's not good. I guess most of the time it's actually candidates that are left over. But anyway, let's ignore real world problems in this video. So a perfect matching is exactly what you see here. So you match every vertex with another vertex such that everything is matched and there are no overlapping edges. Right? So here, again, in the Peterson graph, there are 6 perfect matchings. So one of them looks a little bit like this, and the other 5 are just rotations of one another. And here in the cube graph, there are 9 perfect matchings, so 9 and 6. And kind of until it makes sense, think about a real world problem like matching jobs and candidates or matching whatever, right? Matching is kind of very important let's just count the number of perfect matchings. There could be anything between 0 and essentially any number you want, and we like to count the number. So here we count 9, here we count 6. Say it again, a perfect matching is something where jobs and candidates match up perfectly if you want. So it's a pairing of edges, of vertices. So this should be vertices. Pairing of vertices via edges such that no edges are adjacent and all vertices are hit. So that's a perfect matching, like in my 2 examples above here. And we want to count them. Sounds like a reasonable problem. It's not quite obvious to me from this outset whether I should believe that this is really easy or really hard. I would rather think it's really hard, because the only way I could come up with how to count those perfect matchings is kind of brute force list all of them. And that's usually not a very good idea. But obviously, I'm just very stupid, so there could be a much better solution. So a priori, I can't really tell whether this is difficult or not, right? So difficult or not, I can't tell, but clearly someone has done that in the past, and counting perfect matchings is really difficult. So if you're, well, let's just call it a difficult problem. So if you're a big fan of complexity theory, then the complexity class it belongs into is called sharp P complete. Whatever it is, there are zillions of complexity classes. So let me, at least for this video, I will just go with this is very difficult. But let me just use this picture up here to kind of explain what this is. So there's a complexity class called P, kind of polynomial and that's somewhere here, and let me just call that easy. And then there's a complexity clause called NP complete, which is here, and this is somewhat hard. So this is kind of hard. And there's this very prominent, very well-known open conjecture that P is equal or not equal, more likely NP. So difficult is not equal to hard, if you want. And then there are many other complexity classes, and some of NP hard is really hard. So this is very hard, yeah. And the kind of sharp P is somehow you could think of it as being more difficult than NP complete, but maybe not as difficult as NP hard. But it's still very difficult. So difficult, very difficult, extremely difficult if you want. And P is just easy. So anyway, in complexity theory, there are just many of those classes because we kind of need to make sure what time of growth rate of algorithm you're talking about. And this one is pretty tough. And you could formally prove that this problem is really difficult. So it's essentially this is saying you should give up. If you believe in the statement that we should really solve a problem 100%. And this is where kind of my story kind of kicks in. So if you want to do this counting of perfect matchings kind of for all graphs of the 100% solution, then you can kind of forget it. And there's essentially only the brute force list all of the method. Okay, there you go. So now we can all go home and take a good nap or something because we can't solve the problem. Or we can do something you really should do quite often because this is happening all the time. So that this is a very hard problem, sharp P, doesn't really mean that it's very hard in all cases. Most of the time, it just means it's very hard in quite a few number of cases, but for a lot of, well, in this case, graphs, it's actually easy and we can do much better, right? So what I'm thinking about is, and this comes the story of this, this video, if you want. So maybe it's not hard. So maybe it's like there are zillions of classes of graphs. The graph that can swim, for example, the graph that breathes air, the graphs that have legs, or the graphs that have fins. You get the point. And you have some subclasses of those graphs, and these intersect in a certain way. But maybe our statement here is telling us something about all graphs. And actually, if you analyze it further, it's essentially this counting of perfect matching, maybe only telling us something about one of those classes. So it essentially only says that for this class of graphs, this problem is very difficult, so you can give up on it. And since this class of graphs is a subclass of all graphs, you can give up on it in general. But it doesn't mean that if you have a bubble where it's unrelated, so my have legs and have fins apparently here is unrelated. So by the way, I never knew, I don't actually know what a stone crab is. I'm pretty much ignorant, but apparently a stone crab has legs, but can't swim. There you go. But anyway, so those two here are not related. And this one here is sharp P. So you can kind of prove that, but here we actually don't know because it's not intersecting at all. So why should there be any relation to the general statement, right? So counting, in our specific example here, counting perfect matchings is sharp P in general, right? So there are some subclasses where it's really difficult, but this really doesn't mean it's difficult for all subclasses. Here in my very silly example, you could just take all graphs without edges. Yeah, I mean, I can count perfect matchings for graphs without edges. There's not a single perfect matching, so there you go, problem solved. No sharp P involved, nothing difficult involved. Obviously, that's a silly example, and we want to find good subclasses. But really, I said again, just because something is difficult in general doesn't mean it's difficult always. It just means it's difficult. Usually, it just means it's difficult on certain subclasses. And it could be still quite easy on other subclasses. And that's exactly what happens here with Kasteleyn theorem. Because Kasteleyn theorem solves this for really a large subclass, maybe for all planar graphs. So here, if you want, this is now not have legs, but this would be planar graphs, right? So planar. So in this have legs planar graphs, so it's kind of the same. Right? Having legs would be planar, is kind of the same. Anyway, so for planar graphs, counting perfect matchings is actually easy. It's easy. It's here. It's in polynomial time. It's easy. And you don't need this complex sharp P complete, this very difficult complexity class to do it. But it's rather remarkably fast on a very large class of graphs, on a very important class of graphs. Right? And that's kind of what I wanted to sell. Sometimes the theorem itself is pretty nice, but the real point here is that this is kind of just a blueprint example, a prototypical example of something that happens very often. So you have a statement that is X is very hard in general. It doesn't mean X is very hard, and you should just very hard on interesting subclasses, and you should not give up, but you should rather kind of try to avoid difficult cases if you want. And this is really kind of subtle. For example, another great class, which is usually studied a lot, would be bipartite graphs. So my example of jobs and candidates would be a bipartite graph. But here you could show that this is one of the classes which is a sharp P. So not quite true, but let's say have fins is sharp P. Anyway, so there are certainly bipartite graphs which are also planar, so it's not quite as in this picture, but I hope you get the point. So there could be certain subclasses where actually the problem is easy, although in general it's really difficult. And this is a beautiful example, the theorem about counting perfect matchings, which is just really simple for planar graphs. And I can show you why it's really simple, suppressing a few details, obviously. So we want to count, here's a planar graph, and we want to count the perfect matchings. Here are 4 of them. So here it was solved brute force. There are 4 of them. But there's a better way of doing it. And essentially what you need to do is you need to compute the adjacency matrix and the determinant of it, or let's just say the square root of the determinant is the number of perfect matchings. The only kind of slight catch is that you don't compute the adjacency matrix itself, but a signed version of the adjacency matrix, or a weighted version, where you put orientations on your edges and you put a minus in case the orientation is pointing outwards. So here, for example, 1, 2, 3 are all connected. So 1 is connected to 2, 1 is connected to 3, 1 is connected to 5. I forgot 5, of course. But for 5, it's kind of the opposite orientation, so I put a -1, right? So here 1 is connected to, not to 1, it's connected to 2 and connected to 3 in the correct orientation, and connected to 5 in the negative orientation. And you only need to find some nice orientation here that works. And then I just say that it's a fact that you can always find, actually algorithmically find such a nice orientation. And that's actually how the theorem is proven, and the main meat of the theorem is the algorithm how to compute them. So it's really just computing a determinant of an adjacency matrix. Okay, so what I wanted to tell you today is there is the theorem by the Dutch mathematician that I can't pronounce. So let's not try it again. Let's just call it the theorem by the Dutch mathematician that I can't pronounce. The Dutch physicist, actually, that I can't pronounce. Anyway, so, and that's really, I like this example as a prototypical example of something that is hard in general, like counting perfect matchings, really difficult, could be easy on a subclass, and in this class, a subclass of planar graphs, where there is an explicit algorithm to just compute the number of perfect matchings. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also hope to see you next time.